"You're too dark for this restaurant." The manager sneers at a black single dad celebrating his little girl's big win, but when he calmly reveals he owns the entire building, the whole room freezes. And what happens next will test whether love can really be stronger than hate. Will he choose revenge or something far more powerful? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm rays across the Carter family's small but tidy apartment. James Carter stood at the stove, his skilled hands expertly flipping pancakes while the aroma of crispy bacon filled the air. The sizzling sound of breakfast cooking mixed with the pitter-patter of excited footsteps coming down the hallway. "Daddy, Daddy, look!" 9-year-old Lily burst into the kitchen, her braids bouncing with each step. In her hands, she clutched a bright blue ribbon, the words, "First Place," gleaming in gold letters. Her science fair project, a detailed model of the solar system, had won top honors at yesterday's competition. James turned from the stove, his face breaking into a proud smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "There's my brilliant scientist." He quickly moved the last pancake onto a plate and opened his arms wide. Lily ran into them, giggling as he lifted her off the ground in a big bear hug. "I knew you could do it, baby girl," he said, setting her down gently. "Your mama would be so proud of you right now." His voice softened at the mention of his late wife, and he touched the wedding ring he still wore. Lily's eyes grew thoughtful. "You think she saw me win from heaven, Daddy?" "I know she did." James squeezed her shoulder. "She had the best seat in the house." He turned back to the counter and began placing their breakfast on plates. "And you know what? We're going to celebrate your win properly tonight." Lily climbed onto her chair at their small kitchen table, her legs swinging with excitement. "Really? How?" James set a plate of heart-shaped pancakes in front of her, decorated with strawberries just the way she liked them. "Well, I was thinking, how about dinner at that fancy new restaurant downtown? The one with the big crystal chandelier we always see through the windows?" Lily's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, her eyes growing wide. "Really? You mean it?" She'd often pressed her nose against those windows when they walked past, watching the elegant people inside. "Really, really," James replied, sitting down with his own breakfast. "Your mama always said we should make a big deal out of your achievements, and first place in the science fair? That deserves something special." As they ate their breakfast, Lily chatted excitedly about what she might wear, while James listened with a content smile. The morning sun caught the edges of Sarah's photo on the wall. His late wife's warm brown eyes seemed to twinkle with approval at their plans. After breakfast, James stood in front of his closet, considering his options. He pulled out his best dress shirt, crisp white cotton that he'd saved for special occasions. The iron hissed as he carefully pressed out every wrinkle, taking extra care with the collar and cuffs. His hands moved with practiced precision, remembering the techniques his own father had taught him years ago. From down the hall he could hear Lily in her room, the sound of hangers sliding across the rod as she searched through her dresses. "Daddy," she called out, "can I wear the purple one? The one Grandma gave me for Easter?" "Of course you can, baby," he called back, smiling at her excitement. That dress was her pride and joy, deep purple with tiny white flowers embroidered around the hem. His mother had spent weeks making it by hand. James finished with his shirt and hung it carefully on the door. Next came his tie selection. He chose the navy blue silk one Sarah had given him on their last anniversary together. As he held it, memories washed over him. Sarah adjusting his collar, her gentle hands smoothing his lapels, her proud smile when he dressed up. "Daddy." Lily appeared in his doorway, the purple dress held up against her. "Will you help me with my hair? I want to make it extra special." "Come here, princess." James patted the edge of his bed, and Lily bounced over, sitting patiently while he gathered her hair supplies. His large hands were gentle as they worked through her dark curls, carefully parting and braiding just the way Sarah had taught him. He'd practiced for hours after she passed, determined to make sure Lily would always have pretty hairstyles. "Can you do the crown braid?" Lily asked, holding still as he worked. Like in the picture Mama showed you? For you, anything. James began the intricate pattern, his fingers moving slowly but surely. As he worked, Lily hummed softly, one of Sarah's favorite hymns. The familiar tune filled their comfortable silence. The afternoon passed in a flutter of preparation. James polished his dress shoes until they gleamed, while Lily carefully selected her favorite patent leather Mary Janes. She practiced her curtsies in front of the mirror, making James laugh with her exaggerated bows. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through their windows, James stood in front of his mirror making final adjustments. The white shirt was crisp against his dark skin, tie perfectly knotted, shoes shining. He straightened his shoulders, hearing Sarah's voice in his head. "Stand tall, my love. You're a king taking his princess to dinner." "Ready, Daddy." Lily twirled into his room, a vision in purple. Her crown braid was adorned with tiny white flowers, and her face glowed with excitement. She did a final spin, her dress floating around her like a flower in bloom. James felt his heart swell with love and pride. "You look beautiful, baby girl, just like your mama." He offered her his arm with a playful bow. "Shall we, Miss Carter?" Lily giggled and took his arm with all the grace her 9 years could muster. Together, they walked to their apartment door, pausing only for James to grab his keys and wallet. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as they stepped outside, hand in hand, ready for their special evening. "Daddy," Lily looked up at him as they started down the sidewalk. "Thank you for making tonight so special." James squeezed her small hand in his larger one, his heart full of love for his daughter and the memory of his wife. "You earned it, baby girl. You earned every bit of it." They walked toward downtown, their shadows stretching long behind them, while ahead the restaurant's windows began to twinkle with evening lights. Lily's excitement was infectious, and James found himself smiling, grateful for this moment with his daughter, celebrating her achievement just as Sarah would have wanted. The glass doors of Le Chateau restaurant gleamed in the early evening light as James and Lily Carter stepped into the elegant lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble floors, and the soft murmur of conversation drifted from the dining room. James adjusted his navy blue tie, feeling proud in his freshly pressed suit. 9-year-old Lily couldn't contain her excitement. Her patent leather shoes clicked against the polished floor as she spun in her favorite purple dress, the skirt floating around her like a dancer's. The silver ribbon from her science fair victory was pinned carefully to her chest. "Look, Daddy. The floor is so shiny I can almost see myself." Lily's eyes sparkled with wonder as she twirled again. James smiled, his heart swelling with love. "Easy there, princess. We don't want to get dizzy before dinner." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, steadying her. The maitre d', a tall man in a crisp black suit, stood behind his wooden podium. He glanced up from his reservation book, his expression neutral. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, sir, Carter. Party of 2 for 6:30. James's voice was clear and confident. The maitre d' scanned his book, running his finger down the list. "Ah, yes, Mr. Carter. If you'll just wait a moment, please." Lily bounced on her toes, clutching her father's hand. "Daddy, do you think they have chocolate cake? Mom always said fancy restaurants have the best chocolate cake." James squeezed her small hand. "We'll have to see, won't we? This is your special night after all." A few other diners waited in the lobby, dressed in evening wear. An elderly couple smiled warmly at Lily's enthusiasm, while a businessman in an expensive suit typed on his phone, barely looking up. Heavy footsteps approached from the dining room. The restaurant manager emerged, a stocky man with graying temples and a permanent frown etched into his face. His name tag read, Mr. Peterson. He spoke quietly to the maitre d', who gestured toward James and Lily. The manager's eyes narrowed as he walked over, his gaze moving from James to Lily and back again. His lips curled into a subtle sneer. "Is there a problem here?" James straightened his spine. "No problem at all. We're here for our 6:30 reservation." The manager's voice cut through the lobby like ice. "I'm afraid you're too dark for this restaurant." The words hung in the air like poison. The elderly couple gasped softly. The businessman suddenly found his shoes fascinating. Other guests turned away, their discomfort evident in their rigid postures and averted eyes. Lily's small body went still. Her grip on James's hand tightened as the meaning of the manager's words sank in. Her lower lip trembled, and tears welled up in her big brown eyes. "Daddy?" Her voice quivered. James felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Heat crept up his neck, and his ears rang with the sound of his own heartbeat. 20 years in property management, a veteran who'd served his country, and here he stood, being humiliated in front of his little girl. Lily pressed her face into his arm, her tears soaking into his sleeve. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. The silver ribbon on her dress caught the chandelier light, a cruel reminder of what this evening was supposed to be about. The manager stood there, arms crossed, waiting for them to leave. His stance spoke volumes. He'd done this before, and he expected no resistance. James took a deep breath, remembering his late wife's words. "Our daughter needs to see strength and kindness, not anger." His hands trembled slightly, but he kept his voice steady as he reached down to stroke Lily's hair. "Baby girl," he whispered, "stand up straight now. Remember what Mom always said about holding your head high." Lily hiccuped and lifted her tear-stained face, trying to mirror her father's dignified posture. James pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, the one his wife had embroidered with his initials, and gently dried his daughter's cheeks. The lobby had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the sounds from the dining room seemed muted, as if the whole restaurant held its breath. The maitre d' shuffled papers at his podium, pretending to be busy. The elderly couple whispered to each other, their faces lined with concern. James squared his shoulders, drawing himself up to his full height. His military bearing showed in his straight spine and level gaze. The weight of his property keys pressed against his leg through his pocket, keys that included one to this very building. But that revelation could wait. Right now, his daughter needed to see something more important than power or ownership. She needed to see her father stand firm in the face of injustice, to handle hatred with grace rather than run from it. He looked down at Lily, who had stopped crying, and now watched him with trust in her eyes. The same eyes as her mother's, eyes that had always seen the best in people, even when they showed their worst. James took another deep breath, ready to respond to the manager's cruel words with the dignity his daughter deserved to witness. James felt the weight of his daughter's tears soaking into his sleeve as she pressed against him. The manager's words, "You're too dark for this restaurant," hung in the air like poison. Around them, diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, silverware clinking against plates as some pretended not to notice while others stared openly. Taking a deep breath, James gently squeezed Lily's shoulder. His late wife's voice echoed in his memory. "Show her how to face cruelty with grace." He straightened his spine and met the manager's cold gaze. "I believe there's something you should know," James said, his voice calm but carrying clearly through the hushed restaurant. "I'm James Carter, and I own this building." The effect was immediate. A wine glass crashed somewhere in the dining room. The manager's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Whispers rippled through the restaurant as diners turned to their companions in shock. That's impossible," the manager stammered, his previous arrogance crumbling. "Mr. Carter Island. A black man?" James finished for him, his tone level. "Yes, I am. I'm also a property manager, a veteran, and most importantly," he looked down at Lily, whose tears had slowed as she watched her father stand tall, a father trying to celebrate his daughter's achievement. A woman at a nearby table set down her fork with a sharp clink. "Shame on you," she said clearly to the manager. Several other diners nodded in agreement. From the back of the restaurant, someone began to clap, and the applause spread tentatively through the room. The manager's face flushed red. I didn't realize," he sputtered, tugging at his bow tie. "Perhaps we could arrange." James held up a hand, silencing the manager's desperate backpedaling. He could feel Lily's small hand gripping his, her science fair ribbon glinting under the chandelier light. The fury burning in his chest wanted satisfaction, wanted to see this man humiliated, wanted to shut down the restaurant immediately. But as he looked at his daughter's face, he remembered the lessons he'd been teaching her about forgiveness and dignity. "What you did here tonight was wrong," James said firmly. "Not just to me, but to my daughter, to everyone who witnessed it, to yourself." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You judged us by the color of our skin before you knew anything about who we are." Lily's grip on his hand tightened. She lifted her chin, mirroring her father's posture, though tears still glazed her cheeks. The ribbon on her chest caught the light, a symbol of her achievement that no one could take away. "Daddy," she whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "remember what you always say about being bigger than hate?" James felt his throat tighten with emotion and pride. Even in this moment of humiliation, his little girl was thinking about the values they shared. He squeezed her hand back, drawing strength from her innocent wisdom. The manager had begun to sweat, his eyes darting between James and the watching customers. "Mr. Carter, please, if you'll allow me to make this right." "Making it right isn't about one moment or one apology," James replied. "It's about changing hearts." He looked around the restaurant, meeting the eyes of various patrons. Some looked away, ashamed, while others nodded in understanding. "It's about building a community where my daughter doesn't have to fear being turned away because of how she looks." An older woman stood up from her table, her silver hair gleaming. "Sir," she addressed the manager, "I've been coming to this restaurant for 15 years. I'm appalled by what I've witnessed tonight." Several other diners murmured in agreement. James felt Lily straightening beside him, her tears now dried. She looked up at him with trust and admiration that made his heart swell. This was the moment to show her how to transform pain into purpose. "I could exercise my rights as your landlord right now," James said to the manager, whose face had taken on an ashen hue. "But that wouldn't solve the deeper problem, would it?" He looked down at Lily, then back at the manager. "The question is, are you willing to learn from this moment?" The restaurant had grown so quiet that the soft music playing overhead seemed suddenly loud. The manager's shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions visible in his posture. Around them, diners leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen next. James touched the science fair ribbon on Lily's dress. "My daughter won first place today for a project about how different types of soil help flowers grow. She proved that even in tough conditions, with the right support, beautiful things can flourish." He paused, letting the metaphor settle in the air. "That's what I want her to remember about tonight, not the hatred she encountered, but how we chose to respond to it." Lily's face brightened slightly at the mention of her project. She pulled her shoulders back, standing straighter beside her father. The pride in her accomplishment was gradually returning to her eyes, replacing the hurt that had filled them moments before. James took Lily's hand firmly in his, feeling the warmth of her small fingers intertwined with his own. The evening hadn't gone as planned, but perhaps it would teach an even more valuable lesson than a simple celebration. Together, they would face this moment not with anger or retreat, but with the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. The maitre d' led James and Lily to a corner table, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled out their chairs. The crystal chandelier above cast warm light across the white tablecloth, making the polished silverware sparkle. Lily's eyes were still red from crying, but she held her head high, mimicking her father's dignified posture. "Your server will be with you shortly," the maitre d' said softly, placing menus before them with careful precision. His apologetic glance toward James spoke volumes. Once they were alone, Lily leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, why didn't you make that mean man leave? You own the building." She fiddled with her napkin, her science fair ribbon still pinned proudly to her dress. James reached across the table and took his daughter's small hand in his. The contrast of their dark skin against the pristine white tablecloth reminded him of why they were having this conversation in the first place. He squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes, sweet pea, the right thing isn't always the easy thing." James chose his words carefully, remembering how his late wife would handle difficult conversations with their daughter. "Remember what we learned in church about forgiveness?" Lily nodded slowly. "Pastor Mike said forgiveness is giving someone a chance to do better, even when they hurt you." "That's right. And you know what else?" James smiled warmly. Sometimes people act mean because they're scared or they don't know any better. They need someone to show them a better way. A young waiter approached their table, his hands shaking slightly as he filled their water glasses. "Good evening," he said, his voice cracking. Would you like to hear today's specials?" James nodded encouragingly. "Yes, please. This is a special celebration for my daughter. She won first place in her school's science fair." The waiter's tension eased slightly as he looked at Lily. "Congratulations. What was your project about?" Lily's face brightened. "I showed how plants grow differently in different types of light." Her earlier tears forgotten, she launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her experiment. James watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. This was what he'd wanted for their evening, his daughter feeling proud and special. The waiter seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about her project that made Lily beam with pride. After taking their orders, the waiter hurried away, leaving father and daughter to talk. Lily took a sip of her water, then looked at her father seriously. "But Daddy, what if the manager doesn't want to do better?" James leaned back in his chair, considering her question. Through the elegant archway leading to the kitchen, he could see staff members whispering, throwing furtive glances their way. "Then that's his choice, sweet pea, but we still have to do what's right. Your mama always said that hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that," Lily finished, quoting the familiar phrase her mother had often repeated. Her eyes grew misty. "I miss Mama." "Me too, baby. Me too." James reached over to brush a tear from her cheek. "But you know what? She'd be so proud of you right now. Not just for winning that science fair, but for being strong when things got tough." Their food arrived, presented with elaborate care by the nervous waiter. Lily's eyes widened at the sight of her perfectly arranged plate. "It looks like art," she exclaimed, making the waiter smile genuinely for the first time. As they ate, the initial tension in the restaurant began to fade. Lily chatted about her school friends and her plans for next year's science fair. James listened attentively, his heart swelling with pride at her resilience. She had inherited her mother's ability to find joy, even in difficult moments. "Daddy," Lily said between bites of her chocolate dessert, "I think I understand now, about giving people chances." She pointed her fork at him thoughtfully. "It's like my plants in the science fair. Some of them didn't grow well at first, but when I gave them the right light, they got stronger." James felt tears prick at his eyes, amazed by his daughter's wisdom. "That's exactly right, sweet pea. Sometimes people just need the right light to grow." When the check came, James left a generous tip for their waiter, who had grown increasingly comfortable serving them throughout the meal. As they stood to leave, several other diners nodded respectfully in their direction, some looking ashamed of their earlier silence. Lily held her father's hand as they walked through the restaurant's elegant dining room. Her dress swished against her legs, and her science fair ribbon gleamed under the chandeliers. James felt a mixture of pride and determination with each step they took. As they approached the front entrance, James caught sight of the manager standing near the host station. The man's face was set in a hard glare, his jaw clenched tight as he watched them pass. The earlier shame and shock had been replaced by something darker, more determined. His eyes followed them all the way to the door, burning with an intensity that made it clear this encounter was far from over. James tightened his grip on Lily's hand, shielding her from the manager's hostile gaze. He held the door open for his daughter, allowing her to step out into the cool evening air first. Behind them, the weight of the manager's stare pressed against their backs like a physical force. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Grace Baptist Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. James sat in his usual spot, third row from the front, with Lily beside him in her yellow Sunday dress. She held her children's Bible close, following along with Pastor Mike's sermon about forgiveness. As the final hymn ended and the congregation began to mingle, James noticed the whispers and glances. Brother Marcus, a fellow Vietnam veteran with silver hair and kind eyes, approached first. "James, my friend," Marcus said quietly, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. Sarah showed me that Facebook post last night. Is it true what happened at Carlton's? James's chest tightened. He hadn't expected word to spread so quickly. Lily looked up at him, her small hand finding his. It's true, Marcus, James replied, keeping his voice steady. But we're okay. More church members gathered around them. Sister Betty, who'd been bringing James casseroles since his wife passed, pressed her lips together in a thin line. It's not okay, James Carter. Not one bit. I saw the post too, said David Thompson, another veteran who served with James. 300 shares already. People are angry. Lily squeezed her father's hand tighter. James could feel her tension. She didn't like being the center of attention. The Lord gives us strength to handle these trials, James said, trying to redirect the conversation. But the group wasn't letting it go. You own that building? Sister Betty declared, her voice rising. You could shut them down tomorrow if you wanted. Pastor Mike joined the circle, his presence calming the growing agitation. James showed remarkable restraint, he said, and grace. Maybe too much grace, muttered Brother Marcus. Some folks don't deserve second chances. James looked down at Lily, seeing worry cloud her young face. Jesus taught us to turn the other cheek, he said firmly. But he also turned over tables in the temple, David countered. Sometimes you have to stand up to wrong. More church members joined the discussion. Miss Clara, the choir director, spoke up from behind her floral hat. James, honey, you need to be careful. These situations can get ugly fast. Remember what happened to the Johnson family when they spoke up about discrimination at their workplace? James remembered. The Johnsons had faced harassment and vandalism before finally moving away. He felt Lily press closer to his side. We're already seeing negative comments on that post, Sarah, Marcus's wife added. Some people are saying you're just trying to cause trouble. Cause trouble? Sister Betty's voice cracked with indignation. That man has managed properties in this town for 15 years. Never a complaint. Serves on the deacon board. Raises that precious girl alone after Marie went to glory. And they dare say he's causing trouble? Pastor Mike raised his hands. Let's remember where we are and who we serve, he said gently. James, the church stands with you, brother. Whatever you decide to do. James nodded, grateful for the support but overwhelmed by the attention. Thank you, Pastor. Right now, I'm just trying to follow where the Lord leads. After church, more members approached. Some offered prayers, others shared their own stories of discrimination. A few suggested lawyers. James listened politely, but kept his responses brief, especially aware of Lily absorbing everything. On the drive home, Lily was unusually quiet. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You okay, sweet pea? Why are people so mad, Daddy? She asked. I thought church was about loving everybody. James sighed, choosing his words carefully. It is, baby. But sometimes people feel angry when they see others being hurt. They want to help, even if they don't know the best way. Like when Tommy pushed me on the playground and Jenny wanted to push him back. Exactly like that, James said, smiling at her understanding. But remember what we decided then? That pushing back would just make more pushing, Lily recited. And Mommy always said love stops the pushing better than pushing back does. James felt his throat tighten at the mention of Marie. His late wife had such a way of making complex truths simple enough for a child to grasp. That evening, after a quiet dinner of leftover Sunday roast, James helped Lily get ready for bed. She picked out her favorite pajamas, the ones with tiny stars that Marie had given her for Christmas 2 years ago. As he tucked the covers around her, Lily looked up at him with serious eyes. Daddy? Yes, baby? Are you scared about what Miss Clara said? James sat on the edge of her bed, stroking her hair. A little, he admitted, but being scared doesn't mean we stop doing what's right. Lily nodded, considering this. Then she reached for her bedside table and picked up the framed photo of Marie, her mother's warm smile frozen in time, dark eyes twinkling with joy. Mommy would be proud, she whispered. James felt tears prick his eyes as he leaned down to kiss her forehead. After turning on her nightlight and closing her door partway, he went to his own room. Kneeling beside his bed, Just as he'd done every night since Marie passed, he bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "I need your guidance. Show me how to handle this with grace. Show me how to protect my little girl. Show me how to honor Marie's memory. And Lord, help me forgive." James pulled into his usual parking spot behind the property management building, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly morning air. The weekend's events felt distant now, like a bad dream, until he noticed several newspaper photographers lingering near the restaurant across the street. Reality crashed back hard. The brass bell above the office door chimed as he stepped inside. His secretary, Mrs. Thompson, looked up from her computer with concerned eyes. Her usual cheerful morning greeting was replaced with a worried frown. "Mr. Carter," she said, shuffling some papers on her desk, "there are quite a few emails waiting for you." James hung his coat on the rack, straightening his tie. "That bad?" "Mixed," she replied, handing him a stack of printed messages. "Some are wonderful churches, offering support, local business owners standing with you. But," she hesitated, "but some aren't so nice." James finished for her, thumbing through the pages. His eyes caught phrases like troublemaker and playing the race card. One particularly nasty email suggested he'd orchestrated the whole thing for publicity. "I filtered out the worst ones," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. James nodded gratefully and headed to his office, closing the door softly behind him. He'd barely settled into his chair when his phone buzzed Lily's school. "Mr. Carter, this is Mrs. Roberts, Lily's teacher." His heart clenched. "Is everything all right?" "There's been some tension this morning. Several children were repeating things they'd heard at home about the restaurant incident. Lily's quite upset." James gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of things?" "One boy said his parents called you a—" Mrs. Roberts lowered her voice, "a troublemaker who should know his place." The words hit like a physical blow. James closed his eyes, remembering Lily's tears at the restaurant. Now she was facing the fallout at school, too. "I've addressed it with the class," Mrs. Roberts continued, "but I thought you should know." "Thank you for calling," James managed. "May I speak with Lily?" A moment later, his daughter's small voice came through. "Daddy? Hey, sweetheart, you okay? Tommy said we deserved what happened because we don't belong in fancy places." Her voice quivered. "And Sarah said, her mom says you're just causing problems." James's free hand curled into a fist. "Listen to me, Lily. You belong anywhere your heart and dreams take you. Those kids are just repeating adult problems they don't understand." "I know," she sniffled. "But it still hurts. Want me to pick you up early?" "No," Lily said after a pause. "You always say we have to be brave even when it's hard." Pride swelled in James's chest. "That's my girl. I love you, Lily." "Love you too, Daddy." After hanging up, James turned to his computer. More emails had arrived. A local news station requesting an interview, a civil rights organization offering legal support, and several messages from other building tenants expressing either solidarity or concern about negative attention. His secretary knocked softly. "Mr. Carter, the restaurant's lawyer called. They want to schedule a meeting." James nodded absently, his attention drawn to the window. From his second-floor office, he had a clear view of the restaurant's entrance. The morning rush was starting well-dressed professionals, streaming in for business meetings over coffee and pastries. None of them looked like him. None of them had to worry about their children being taunted at school or their inbox filling with hate. The restaurant's elegant sign caught the morning sun, gleaming like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The comfortable illusion of progress had shattered, revealing the persistent prejudice beneath the polite smiles and formal greetings. A delivery truck pulled up to the restaurant's service entrance. The driver, a young black man, received barely a glance from the manager who'd confronted James. The same manager who now pretended to be busy with paperwork whenever James passed by. The fight wasn't just about one restaurant or one incident anymore. It was about Lily growing up in a world where she'd be judged by her skin color before her science fair ribbons. About all the other fathers and daughters who'd faced similar discrimination but lacked the leverage to fight back. James watched another group of diners enter the restaurant, their laughter drifting up to his window. The breakfast crowd would soon give way to the lunch rush, and life would go on as if nothing had happened. Except now he knew this was just the beginning. The morning sun climbed higher, casting his reflection in the window glass. In it, James saw not just himself, but his late wife's dreams for their daughter, his father's struggles for dignity, and all the hopes of his community resting on his shoulders. The fight ahead would require more than just legal meetings and public statements. It would demand the kind of courage that chose love over bitterness, hope over hate. His office phone rang again. More emails arrived. The photographers across the street adjusted their cameras. James remained at the window, watching the restaurant that had become the battlefield for a fight he never wanted but couldn't ignore. The doorbell chimed, just as James finished helping Lily with her math homework. He glanced at the clock. 6:30 p.m. The familiar voices of Miss Eleanor and Miss Ruth, two elderly ladies from his church, drifted through the door. "James Carter, open up. We've got dinner for you and that precious girl." Miss Eleanor's warm voice carried through the apartment. James opened the door to find not just the two sisters, but half a dozen church ladies, all carrying covered dishes and wearing determined smiles. The aroma of home-cooked meals filled the hallway. "We heard what happened," Miss Ruth said, her silver hair neatly pinned back. "And we're not having any of that nonsense in our community." She thrust a steaming casserole into his hands. "Ladies, you didn't have to," James started, but Miss Eleanor was already shuffling past him, her floral dress swishing as she moved. "Lily, sweetheart," she called out, "come give Miss Eleanor a hug." Lily bounded from the kitchen table, her face lighting up at the sight of their visitors. "Miss Eleanor!" She rushed into the older woman's open arms. The ladies filed in, filling their modest living room with warmth and chatter. Mrs. Johnson, who had taught Sunday school for 30 years, set down a fresh apple pie. Miss Margaret, the choir director, carried a pot of her famous chicken soup. Each woman brought not just food, but decades of wisdom earned through their own battles against injustice. "Where should I put this sweet potato casserole?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her arthritis, curved fingers gripping the dish carefully. "Kitchen counter, please," James directed, watching in amazement as his apartment transformed into an impromptu gathering. Miss Ruth settled into James's favorite armchair, patting the spot next to her for Lily. "Your mama," she said softly. "She was such a special lady. Remember how she always said every person deserves to be treated like a child of God?" Lily nodded, her eyes growing misty. "She used to say that at bedtime." "That's right," Miss Eleanor added, lowering herself onto the couch. "Sarah was always thinking about ways to make people feel welcome. Remember that Christmas program she organized, James? The one where she made sure every child had a special part?" James remembered. Sarah had spent weeks ensuring that even the shyest kids felt included. She never let anyone feel left out or less than. Mrs. Johnson reached for James's hand. "We've been praying about this situation, James. All of us have. And you know what? We think Sarah would want you to do more than just stand your ground. She'd want you to change things." "Change things?" James asked, settling into the remaining chair while Lily curled up at his feet. Miss Margaret nodded vigorously. "That building of yours, it's not just about what's wrong with that restaurant. It's about what could be right about that space." The ladies exchanged knowing looks. Miss Eleanor pulled out a worn Bible from her oversized purse. "Remember Exodus 23:9? Do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt." "Sarah used to quote that verse," James said softly, his throat tightening. "She did," Miss Ruth confirmed. "And she always said that someday you'd do something big for this community, something that would bring people together." Lily looked up at her father. "Like what, Daddy?" The ladies began sharing stories about Sarah, how she'd organized community dinners, how she'd always made room at her table for anyone who needed a meal. As they talked, James felt something stirring in his heart. Mrs. Thompson reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "I brought these," she said, spreading old photographs across the coffee table. "From when your wife helped start the church's fellowship program." The photos showed people of all backgrounds sharing meals, laughing together. In one, Sarah stood beaming in the church kitchen, her arms around two elderly women, one black, one white, as they taught younger women their secret recipes. "Your mama," Miss Eleanor told Lily. "She knew how to make a space where everyone felt at home." James picked up one of the photos, studying his wife's radiant smile. She had always believed in the power of sharing meals, of creating places where barriers fell away and people could truly see each other. "The upper floor of your building," Miss Ruth said carefully. "It's been empty for what, 2 years now?" James nodded. "Nobody's wanted to lease it." "Maybe," Mrs. Johnson suggested, "that's because it's waiting for the right purpose." The ladies stayed for another hour, praying with James and Lily, sharing memories of Sarah, and filling their kitchen with enough food for a week. As they left, Miss Eleanor pressed a final dish into James's hands. "Sarah's recipe," she whispered. "Her famous peach cobbler. She always said desserts could build bridges between people." After the ladies left and Lily was tucked into bed, James sat at his desk, pulling out a fresh notebook. The warmth of the evening, the stories of Sarah, and the ladies' wisdom swirled in his mind. He began to sketch ideas: tables arranged for conversation, a counter where people could watch their coffee being made, comfortable chairs where anyone could feel welcome to stay a while. He wrote words in the margins: community, welcome, dignity, hope. As the clock ticked past midnight, James kept writing. He drew rough floor plans, listed potential menu items, and wrote down Sarah's favorite Bible verses about hospitality. In the quiet of the night, a vision began to take shape, not just a cafe, but a place where his wife's dream of bringing people together could live on. The notebook pages filled with possibilities. Local art on the walls, an area for children to read, tables large enough for different groups to share. Every detail he sketched was infused with Sarah's spirit of welcome and his own determination to create change. His pen moved across the paper, driven by the evening's conversations and years of stored-up hope. This wouldn't just be a business, it would be an answer to hatred, a space where dignity wasn't determined by the color of someone's skin, but by the simple fact of their humanity. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patches of light across the breakfast table. James flipped another blueberry pancake onto Lily's plate, watching as her face lit up at the sight of her favorite breakfast. The sweet aroma of maple syrup filled their cozy kitchen. "Baby girl, I've been thinking about something," James said, settling into his chair across from her. He folded his hands on the table, the way he always did when he had something important to share. "You know that big empty space above the restaurant?" Lily nodded, her mouth full of pancake. A drop of syrup trickled down her chin, and she wiped it away with her napkin. "Well, what if we turned it into something special?" James leaned forward, his voice warm with excitement. "A cafe where anyone, no matter their color or clothes, is welcome. Where people can come together, share good food, and just be themselves." Lily's fork clattered to her plate. Her eyes grew wide, sparkling with possibility. "Like a happy place, Daddy?" "Exactly like that, sweetheart." James smiled, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "A place where no one ever has to feel the way we felt that night, where everyone's treated with respect. Could we have music?" Lily bounced in her seat. "And maybe those fancy drinks with whipped cream on top?" James chuckled. "We sure could. And maybe even a little corner where kids can read or do their homework after school. Can I help design it?" Lily jumped up from her chair, nearly knocking over her glass of orange juice. "I can draw pictures of how it should look." "Slow down there, princess." James steadied the glass with a laugh. "First, we need to take a look at the space and see what we're working with. Want to come with me after breakfast?" Lily nodded eagerly, attacking her remaining pancakes with renewed vigor. An hour later, James unlocked the heavy door leading to the building's second floor. The stairwell was dim, lit only by a small window at the landing. Their footsteps echoed against the concrete steps as they climbed. "Hold my hand, Lily," James said, reaching back. "It's a little dark up here." Her small fingers wrapped around his as they reached the top. James fumbled with another key, then pushed open the door to the empty floor. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. The space was vast and open, with high ceilings and exposed brick walls. Their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, which were scratched but solid. James pulled out his notebook and pen, starting to make notes. "Let's see, we'll need some serious cleaning first." He walked the perimeter, tapping the walls occasionally. "The electrical needs updating, and we'll want to check the plumbing." But Lily wasn't listening to his practical assessments. She twirled in the empty space, her arms spread wide. "Daddy, look, we could put tables here," she pointed to one corner. "And maybe some comfy chairs over there, like at the library." James paused in his note-taking, watching his daughter dance through their future cafe. Her joy was infectious, and he found himself seeing past the dust and where to what could be. "The counter could go along this wall," he said, warming to her enthusiasm, "with a big display case for pastries and treats." "And plants," Lily exclaimed, running to the windows. "Miss Eleanor always says plants make a room feel alive." James walked over to join her at the windows, which overlooked the busy street below. The morning sun made the dust-streaked glass sparkle. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "Who are you calling, Daddy?" "Mr. Thompson," James replied. "He's a contractor I've worked with before. Good man, honest prices. We'll need his help to make this place safe and beautiful." While he talked on the phone, Lily continued her exploration, pointing out spots where they could hang pictures or set up displays. Her excitement filled the empty space with possibility. After ending the call, James made a few more notes, then walked to the center of the room. Lily joined him, slipping her small hand into his again. They stood together in the dusty sunlight, and James could almost hear it. The gentle hum of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, maybe even some soft jazz playing in the background. He could see people of all colors and backgrounds, sharing tables, learning each other's stories, breaking down walls over cups of coffee and warm pastries. "Can you imagine it, Lily?" he asked softly. She squeezed his hand. "I can hear music already, Daddy, and happy voices, lots and lots of happy voices." They stood there a moment longer, father and daughter, sharing the same vision in the golden morning light. The empty space around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to be transformed by their dream of unity and welcome. James pushed his shopping cart down the cereal aisle, checking his grocery list. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the familiar grocery store where he'd shopped for years. He reached for Lily's favorite cereal, the one with the little marshmallows she loved so much. "That's him," a whispered voice carried from the next aisle, "the troublemaker." James's hand paused mid-reach. He'd grown used to these whispers over the past few days, but they still stung. "Always trying to make everything about race," another voice muttered. "The restaurant had dress codes, you know." James took a deep breath and grabbed the cereal box, placing it carefully in his cart. He'd worn his best suit that night, and Lily had worn her prettiest dress. They both knew it hadn't been about dress codes. As he turned the corner into the produce section, Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, touched his arm gently. Her kind eyes crinkled with concern behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "James," she said softly, "I just want you to know what you did, standing up like that. It meant something to a lot of us." She patted his arm, then shuffled away before he could respond. At the meat counter, the butcher, Mr. Rodriguez, gave him a subtle nod. "The usual, Mr. Carter?" And he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "My wife and I, we support you. It's time someone spoke up." James nodded gratefully, accepting the wrapped package of chicken. But as he moved toward the checkout lines, more whispers followed. "Making our town look bad on social media. Should have just gone somewhere else." Always playing the victim. The checkout clerk, the young woman who usually chatted with him about Lily's school activities, barely met his eyes today. Her "have a nice day" sounded forced and distant. James loaded the grocery bags into his car, his movements mechanical. The afternoon sun beat down on the parking lot, but he felt a different kind of heat, the burning awareness of being watched, judged, discussed. When he got home, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her school uniform, listlessly pushing crayons around instead of doing her homework. Something was wrong. His daughter usually bounded to greet him, eager to share stories about her day. "Baby girl?" James set the groceries down. "Everything okay?" Lily's lower lip trembled. She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Madison and Sophie wouldn't play with me at recess today," she whispered. James's heart clenched. He pulled out a chair next to her, sitting down heavily. "Did they say why?" Lily nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Madison said her mom told her we're troublemakers, that we're trying to make everyone feel bad about being white." She looked at her father, confusion and hurt written across her face. "But that's not true, Daddy. We just wanted to have dinner that night. We weren't trying to make anyone feel bad." James pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs. He stroked her hair, the same way her mother used to do when Lily was upset. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured. "I know it hurts. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy. But why?" Lily's voice was muffled against his shirt. "Why do they have to be mean? We didn't do anything wrong." James pulled back slightly, wiping her tears with his thumb. "Remember what we talked about in church? About how Jesus faced people being mean to him too? But he kept showing love anyway?" Lily sniffled and nodded. "Well, that's what we're going to do too. We're going to keep being kind, keep showing love, even when others don't." He smiled gently. "And you know what? This won't last forever. Better days are coming, I promise." "Like with the cafe?" Lily's voice held a hint of hope. "Exactly like that. We're going to build something beautiful, something that brings people together instead of pushing them apart." He kissed her forehead. "And one day, maybe Madison and Sophie will come to the cafe too, and they'll understand." Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can we pray about it, Daddy? Like Mommy used to do with us when things were hard?" James's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. She'd always known how to find light in the darkest moments. "Of course we can, baby girl. Let's get ready for bed first, okay?" After Lily had changed into her pajamas and brushed her teeth, they knelt together beside her bed, just as they had done with her mother years ago. The soft glow of Lily's butterfly nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls. "Dear God," James began, holding his daughter's small hands in his, "we come to you tonight with heavy hearts. It's hard when people don't understand us, when they say unkind things. Please help Madison and Sophie be nice again," Lily added quietly. James squeezed her hands gently. "Lord, we ask for strength to keep showing love, even when it's difficult. Help us remember that you see us, that you know our hearts. Give us courage to keep moving forward with our plans for the cafe, to create something that brings your love to our community. And please help Daddy not be sad when people whisper about him at the store," Lily added, making James's heart ache with her perceptiveness. "Most of all, Lord," James continued, his voice thick with emotion, "we thank you for each other, for the hope you give us, and for the promise that brighter days are ahead. In Jesus' name, amen." "Amen," Lily echoed softly. James helped Lily into bed, tucking her favorite stuffed elephant beside her. As he pulled the covers up to her chin, she reached out and touched his cheek. "Daddy!" "I'm glad we're building the cafe. Even if some people are mean now, I think it's going to be really special." James leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Me too, baby girl, me too." He turned on her star projector, filling the ceiling with tiny points of light. "Sweet dreams, princess." "Night, Daddy," Lily mumbled, already drifting off. James lingered in the doorway, watching the stars dance across his daughter's ceiling. Despite the weight of the day, the whispers, the judgment, the pain of seeing his child hurt, he felt a flutter of hope in his chest. They would get through this together, one day at a time, holding on to their faith and each other. James stood in the doorway of the soon-to-be cafe, watching as morning sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. The empty space buzzed with activity. The sound of hammers, drills, and friendly chatter filled the air. "Coming through!" called Bill Thompson, a retired carpenter from church, carrying a stack of wood planks. His weathered hands, marked by decades of craftsmanship, moved with practiced precision as he set the boards down. 3 veterans from James's prayer group were already hard at work, carefully removing old wallpaper. Their military discipline showed in their methodical approach, working in perfect sync. Tom, the youngest of them, paused to wipe sweat from his brow. "James," he called out, "where do you want these old panels?" "Stack them by the dumpster outside," James replied, rolling up his sleeves. "And thank you all again for being here." "Wouldn't be anywhere else," Tom said with a firm nod. The room slowly filled with more volunteers. Mrs. Jenkins, the church choir director, arrived with her husband carrying boxes of cleaning supplies. Behind them came the Wilson sisters, both in their 70s, armed with buckets and mops. "This floor hasn't seen a good scrubbing in years," Martha Wilson declared, already getting to work. Lily bounced through the door, carefully balancing a tray of plastic cups. "Daddy, I made lemonade for everyone." Her face beamed with pride as she navigated through the workers. "That's my girl," James said, watching as his daughter offered refreshments to each volunteer. She had tied her hair back with her mother's old bandana, determined to be part of the work crew. "Mr. Carter," called Sarah, a local art teacher who'd volunteered to help with the interior design. "I've got some color samples for the walls. What do you think about warm sunshine for the main space?" James walked over to examine the paint swatches. "Perfect. Bright and welcoming. Exactly what we're going for." The morning progressed into afternoon as the space slowly transformed. Old ceiling tiles came down, revealing beautiful wooden beams that Bill insisted they restore rather than cover up. The volunteers worked in shifts, taking breaks to share stories and laugh together. "You know," said Richard, a retired police officer who'd been quietly painting trim all morning, "I've lived in this town 40 years. Never seen anything bring people together quite like this." James nodded, watching as Lily carefully helped Mrs. Jenkins arrange flowers in mason jars, a test run for future table decorations. His daughter had been through so much lately, but here, surrounded by community love, her smile was genuine again. "Miss Lily," called Martha Wilson, "would you bring that lemonade over here? These old bones need refreshing." Lily carefully carried her tray to the Wilson sisters. "I added extra ice, just like you taught me," she said proudly. "Sweet child," Betty Wilson said, taking a long sip. "Your mama would be so proud of you and your daddy." James felt his throat tighten at the mention of his late wife. She had always believed in bringing people together, in fighting hatred with love. The cafe was becoming more than just a response to discrimination. It was evolving into a living tribute to her spirit. By mid-afternoon, the space had undergone a remarkable transformation. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new lighting fixtures hung from the restored beams, and the floors gleamed from the Wilson sisters' determined scrubbing. "Look what I found," Lily called out, holding up an old photograph she'd discovered while helping clean out a storage closet. It showed the building in its early days, when it had been a gathering place for the community. "History has a way of coming full circle," Bill commented, studying the photo. This place was meant to bring folks together again. The volunteers gathered around a makeshift lunch table, sharing sandwiches and stories. James watched as Tom, the veteran, taught Lily how to properly fold napkins for future table settings. Mrs. Jenkins hummed gospel tunes while arranging chairs, and the Wilson sisters debated the best recipe for peach cobbler, which they insisted must be on the cafe's menu. "We're not just building a cafe," Sarah observed, watching the scene. "We're building bridges." As the afternoon sun began to fade, James stood in the center of the room. Sawdust danced in the golden light, streaming through freshly cleaned windows. The walls, though only partially painted, already felt warmer. Volunteers moved about, cleaning up their tools and materials, their faces tired but satisfied. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we put Mama's picture on that wall?" She pointed to a spot near where the entrance would be. "That's a perfect idea, sweetheart," James replied, pulling her close. The sound of laughter echoed through the space as Bill told one of his famous corny jokes to the cleanup crew. The Wilson sisters were already planning tomorrow's work schedule, their enthusiasm undimmed by the day's labor. Tom and his fellow veterans carefully stored their tools, everything in its proper place. James looked around at these people, his people, who had shown up not just to paint walls or lay floors, but to stand against hatred with hammers and paintbrushes. They had transformed an empty space into something filled with promise, learning, and shared purpose. He whispered softly, "This is what community looks like." The morning sun painted golden streaks across the cafe's freshly polished floors. James Carter stood at the entrance, taking in every detail of the transformed space. The walls, now a warm cream color, displayed local artwork showing scenes of community life. Round tables dotted the room, each topped with a small vase of wildflowers that Lily had helped arrange the night before. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods wafted from the kitchen where Mrs. Thompson, their newly hired baker, had been working since dawn. Her cinnamon rolls, still warm from the oven, sat proudly displayed in the glass case near the counter. "Daddy, look!" Lily tugged at his sleeve, pointing to the growing crowd outside. "There are so many people." James smiled, straightening his tie. Lily looked beautiful in her yellow dress, her hair carefully braided with ribbons that matched the cafe's curtains. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she bounced on her toes. "Ready, sweetheart?" James asked, reaching for her hand. "Ready." She squeezed his fingers tight. As they opened the doors, soft jazz music filled the air from hidden speakers. People began streaming in, church members, veterans, neighbors, and faces James had never seen before. The room quickly filled with chatter and laughter. Sarah Jenkins, an elderly woman from their church, was the first to reach the counter. "1 coffee and a cinnamon roll, please," she said, beaming at James. This place is exactly what our town needed. More customers followed, forming a line that stretched to the door. James watched as his staff, carefully chosen from all walks of life, worked together seamlessly. Mark, a young man with sleeve tattoos and a kind smile, operated the espresso machine with artistic flair. Diana, a college student with bright blue hair, called out orders with cheerful efficiency. The scene before him was exactly what James had dreamed of. At one table, a businessman in a suit shared conversation with a construction worker still dusty from his morning shift. Near the window, a group of teenage girls giggled with an elderly couple over shared plates of pastries. The barriers that usually divided people seemed to melt away in the warm atmosphere. Lily flitted between tables like a happy butterfly, offering extra napkins and collecting empty plates. She paused often to chat with customers, her natural friendliness drawing smiles from everyone she met. As the morning wore on, James noticed familiar faces from the incident at the restaurant downstairs. Some looked uncomfortable at first, but the welcoming atmosphere seemed to ease their tension. A woman who had turned away that night now sat with her young son, teaching him to share his cookie with another child. Around noon, Reverend Walker from their church gently clinked his spoon against his coffee cup, catching everyone's attention. "I believe James has something to say to us all." The room quieted. James felt Lily's small hand slip into his as he moved to the center of the room. Looking around at the diverse faces turned toward him, he took a deep breath. "When my late wife and I first bought this building," he began, his voice steady and warm. "She had a dream. She wanted to create a place where our daughter could grow up seeing the best in people, not the worst, where love would be stronger than hate." He paused, squeezing Lily's hand. "A few months ago, right downstairs, my daughter and I faced something no one should ever face. We could have let that moment defeat us, let it turn our hearts bitter. But then I remembered what my wife always said, that love is the only force strong enough to transform pain into purpose." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others wiped away tears. "Look around you," James continued, gesturing to the room. "This is what happens when we choose love over hate, when we build bridges instead of walls, when we see each other as neighbors instead of strangers." Lily beamed up at him, her face glowing with pride. "This cafe isn't just about serving coffee and pastries," James said, his voice growing stronger. "It's about serving hope. It's about showing our children that kindness can triumph over cruelty, that when we stand together, we stand stronger." The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Thompson appeared from the kitchen with a surprise, a large cake decorated with the cafe's name, Unity Cafe, in elegant script. As the crowd continued clapping, James felt something shift inside his chest. The weight he'd carried since that night at the restaurant seemed to lift. Looking around at the joy-filled faces, the mixed laughter, the simple human connections being formed over cups of coffee, he knew he'd transformed that moment of pain into something beautiful. Lily hugged his waist tight, and he could feel her happy tears soaking into his shirt. Above them, streaming through the tall windows, the midday sun bathed the room in warm golden light. In that moment, James felt a deep peace settle over him, as if his wife's spirit was there too, smiling down on their dream finally made real. The applause continued, punctuated by calls of "Amen" and "Thank you, James," but he barely heard them. He was too caught up in the miracle before him. A room full of people choosing love over hate, proving that even the deepest wounds could become foundations for healing. The evening air held a gentle warmth as James and Lily walked hand in hand down Main Street. Street lamps cast soft pools of light on the sidewalk, and crickets chirped their evening songs from nearby bushes. They'd just finished dinner at home, mac and cheese, Lily's favorite comfort food, when James remembered he'd left some paperwork in his office at the cafe. "Can we get ice cream after?" Lily asked, skipping alongside him. Her braids bounced with each step, the yellow ribbons still perfectly tied from earlier. James chuckled. "We just had dinner, sweetie, but the cafe has the best vanilla ice cream," she said, giving him her best puppy dog eyes. "Please?" "We'll see," James replied, smiling at her persistence. The cafe had become their special place over the past few weeks. Every morning, Lily would help arrange the flowers on the tables before school, and in the afternoons, she'd do her homework at what she called her special corner table. As they rounded the corner onto Oak Street, James noticed something was different. The warm glow that usually spilled from the cafe's windows was somehow wrong, darker, distorted. His steps slowed as they got closer. Lily saw it first. She stopped dead in her tracks, her small hand tightening around his. "Daddy." James's heart dropped into his stomach. Cruel words were spray-painted across the front windows in angry red letters. Hate-filled messages dripped down the glass, the paint still wet and glistening in the streetlight. Someone had thrown rocks, too. Spiderweb cracks spread across one window, and shards of glass littered the sidewalk. No, no, no. James fumbled with his keys, hands shaking as he unlocked the door. The bell above chimed cheerfully, a jarring contrast to the devastation before them. Inside, the damage was even worse. Chairs lay overturned, and someone had dumped coffee grounds all over the floor. The artwork on the walls, paintings done by local artists, had been slashed. Even the vases of flowers Lily had arranged that morning were smashed, water pooling on the tables and dripping onto the floor. Lily's breath came in short gasps. "Why would someone do this?" Her voice cracked. "We didn't do anything wrong." James couldn't answer. His throat felt too tight. He'd seen hate before, had faced it many times in his life, but seeing it directed at something he'd built with love, something meant to bring people together, cut deeper than he'd expected. Lily walked slowly to her corner table, now covered in coffee grounds and broken glass. Her science homework from that afternoon was still there, now soaked with water from the overturned vase. When she picked up the paper, it fell apart in her hands. That's when she started crying. Not the dramatic sobs of a child's typical tears, but quiet, heartbroken weeping that shook her small shoulders. "Baby, come here," James said, opening his arms. She ran to him, burying her face in his shirt. He could feel her tears soaking through to his skin. "They ruined everything," she whispered between sobs. "All the pretty things. All our hard work." James held her tighter, trying to be strong for her, but feeling his own resolve crumbling. The cafe had represented so much more than just a business. It was supposed to be a symbol of hope, a place where love conquered hate. Now it lay in ruins, defaced by the very darkness he'd tried to fight against. "I thought," Lily hiccuped, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, "I thought if we were nice enough, if we showed them love like you said." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. James guided her to one of the few chairs still standing, and sat down heavily, pulling her onto his lap. She curled into him like she used to when she was smaller, seeking comfort in his embrace. The familiar weight of her should have been reassuring, but tonight it only reminded him of his failure to protect her from the world's cruelty. They sat there in silence, surrounded by the wreckage of their dreams. The only sounds were Lily's occasional sniffles and the steady drip of water from the overturned vases. Through the vandalized windows, James could see people passing by on the street. Some slowed to look, others hurried past, averting their eyes. No one came in to help. The sight of those turned faces struck him harder than the vandalism itself. He'd believed in the power of community, in the goodness of people. He'd preached forgiveness and second chances, even when others questioned his choices. But sitting here now, holding his crying daughter in a cafe that lay in ruins, he felt that faith wavering. His late wife's picture had hung behind the counter, a small photo of her smiling, watching over their new beginning. Now the frame lay shattered on the floor, her image bent and stained with coffee. It was like losing her all over again, losing the dreams they'd shared for their daughter's future. Lily's breathing eventually steadied as she drifted into an exhausted sleep against his chest. James stared at the hateful words scrawled across his windows, at the destruction that surrounded him. Everything they'd built, everything they'd hoped to represent, had been destroyed in a single act of hate. The weight of it all, the lost investment, the shattered dreams, the pain in his daughter's eyes, pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. In the dim light of the vandalized cafe, with his daughter sleeping in his arms, James finally let his own tears fall. Maybe hate wins after all, he whispered into the darkness. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, but James Carter barely noticed it. He sat at the breakfast table, his coffee growing cold, staring blankly at the newspaper. The front page showed a photo of his vandalized cafe, the hateful words blurred out but still burning in his mind. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed the paper away. The weight of everything, the restaurant incident, the whispers around town, and now this, pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Daddy?" Lily's small voice came from the hallway. "You didn't make breakfast." James looked up, guilt washing over him. For the first time in 9 years, he'd forgotten to make his daughter breakfast. "I'm sorry, baby. I'll get right on it." But Lily didn't move toward the kitchen. Instead, she disappeared into the living room. James heard her footsteps, then the sound of something being lifted off a shelf. When she returned, she carried her mother's silver-framed photograph in both hands, treating it like a precious treasure. Lily placed the photo directly in front of James, right on top of the newspaper. Her mother's warm smile looked back at him, her eyes bright with the same determination he'd fallen in love with years ago. "Mommy always said love is stronger than hate," Lily said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle wisdom her mother once had. "She told me that before she went to heaven. Remember, Daddy?" James stared at the photograph, his vision blurring with tears. Sarah's last words to their daughter had been about love, always about love, even when the cancer was taking everything else away. "She did say that, didn't she?" His voice cracked. "And you always say we should listen to Mommy?" Lily continued, climbing onto his lap like she used to when she was smaller. "So we can't stop now, right?" The dam broke. James wrapped his arms around his daughter, pulling her close as the tears fell freely. His body shook with quiet sobs, all the pain and frustration of the past weeks pouring out. Lily hugged him back fiercely, her small hands patting his back just like he did when she cried. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "We can fix it. We fixed it before." Through his tears, James remembered the day Sarah had passed. He'd felt this same crushing despair then, wondering how he could possibly go on. But he had, for Lily, for Sarah's memory, for the promise of a better tomorrow. "Your mommy was the smartest person I ever knew," James said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "And you're just like her, you know that?" Lily smiled, reaching out to touch her mother's photograph. "She wouldn't want us to give up. She never gave up, even when she was really sick." James looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She had Sarah's strength, her unwavering faith in goodness. While he'd been drowning in despair, his 9-year-old had been holding on to hope. No, she never did give up, James agreed, his voice growing stronger. And neither will we. He stood up, lifting Lily with him and spinning her around once, making her giggle. First, let's make breakfast. Can't fight hate on an empty stomach, right? As James prepared pancakes, Lily's favorite, his mind began to clear. The cafe wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of everything they believed in. Letting it stay vandalized meant letting hate win, and Sarah would never have accepted that. While they ate, James reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Mr. Thompson's number, the retired veteran who'd helped with the initial renovation. "What are you doing, Daddy?" Lily asked, syrup dripping from her fork. "Calling in reinforcements," James replied, pressing the call button. "Remember how many people helped us build the cafe? Well, they're going to help us rebuild it too." Mr. Thompson answered on the third ring. "James, I saw the news. Been waiting for your call, son." "I need help, sir," James said, his voice steady now. "The cafe. Say no more. I'll round up the usual suspects. We'll meet you there in an hour." James made more calls as Lily finished her breakfast. Pastor Roberts promised to announce it at church. Mrs. Wilson from the senior center said she'd bring sandwiches for the workers. His secretary agreed to post on social media, calling for volunteers. Between bites of pancake, Lily made her own plans. "Can I make lemonade again? The workers liked it last time." "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart," James smiled, watching her collect lemons from the fruit bowl. His daughter's simple act of faith, making lemonade, believing people would come to drink it, touched something deep in his heart. He looked at Sarah's photo again, still sitting on the table. The morning sun caught it just right, making her smile seem to brighten. "Love is stronger than hate," he repeated softly, feeling the truth of those words settle into his bones. The defeat of last night began to lift, replaced by determination. The vandals had tried to destroy more than just the cafe. They'd tried to break his spirit, to prove that hatred could win. But looking at his daughter squeezing lemons with fierce concentration, James knew better. Love didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered in a child's wisdom. Sometimes it showed up in pancakes and lemonade, in phone calls and helping hands. Sometimes it spoke through memories and photographs, reminding you to keep going when giving up seemed easier. James stood, ready to face whatever came next. "Come on, Lily. Let's go show them what love can do." The early morning sun had barely touched the cafe's windows when the first volunteers arrived. James stood on the sidewalk, keys in hand, watching in amazement as car after car pulled up. Some faces he recognized from church, others were complete strangers who had heard about the vandalism on the local news. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Peterson, his elderly neighbor, called out as she stepped carefully from her daughter's car. In her arms, she carried a box of fresh-baked muffins. "Can't paint on an empty stomach now, can we?" James felt a lump form in his throat. "Ma'am, you didn't have to." "Nonsense," she interrupted, pressing the box into his hands. "This is what community means." Behind him, Lily bounced on her toes, her paint-splattered overalls already showing her eagerness to start. "Daddy, look, the hardware store truck is here." Sure enough, Thompson's Hardware had sent over a pickup loaded with paint cans, brushes, and supplies. Bob Thompson himself stepped out, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Thought you could use some help covering up that nonsense," he said, gesturing to the hateful words that still marred the cafe's facade. Within an hour, the cafe hummed with activity. The sound of scraping filled the air as volunteers worked to remove the graffiti. Others set up ladders and laid down drop cloths, preparing the walls for fresh paint. "We're thinking sunshine yellow for the main wall," announced Sarah, one of the church choir members. "Brighter than before, that'll show them we won't be dimmed." James watched as people from all walks of life worked side by side. There was Tom, a retired veteran, carefully taping around window frames. Next to him, a young college student who'd read about the incident online, steadily rolled paint across the wall. Even Mr. Wu from the Chinese restaurant down the street had closed his business for the morning to help. Lily flitted between the workers, offering water bottles and words of encouragement just as she had during the initial renovation. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, a fierce determination that reminded James so much of her mother. "Look what we brought," called a voice from the doorway. James turned to see Miss Roberts, Lily's science teacher, leading a group of students from school. Each child carried art supplies and construction paper. "We thought maybe we could make some positive artwork to hang on the walls while the paint dries." Lily's face lit up at the sight of her classmates. Even some of the kids who had stopped playing with her were there, looking sheepish but eager to help. The morning wore on, and the transformation was stunning. Where hate had marked the walls, vibrant colors now bloomed. The volunteers had not just covered the graffiti, they had turned each wall into a canvas of hope. Local news crews arrived, capturing the scene of unity. This time, James didn't mind the attention. Let people see what love could do in the face of hate. "Daddy," Lily called from across the room. She stood on a small stepladder, paintbrush in hand. "Can I add something special?" James walked over, steadying the ladder. "What do you have in mind, sweetheart?" With careful strokes, Lily began painting a heart on the freshly dried wall. Her small tongue stuck out in concentration as she worked. The heart wasn't perfect. It was slightly lopsided and dripped a little at the bottom. But to James, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Around them, the cafe continued its transformation. Mrs. Peterson had set up an impromptu snack station, feeding the volunteers. The retired veterans had formed a task force to install better security lights. A local artist was sketching plans for a mural of clasped hands of different colors. James watched his daughter complete her heart, adding the words, "Love wins," inside it in her careful, 9-year-old handwriting. In that moment, seeing her absolute conviction that good would triumph over evil, James felt his faith surge back, stronger than ever. This wasn't just about a cafe anymore. It wasn't even about the hate that had tried to destroy it. This was about a community choosing love, choosing to stand together, choosing to build rather than break. Every paintbrush, every hammer, every helping hand was a testament to the power of unity over division. Looking at Lily, still perched proudly by her heart painting, James saw the future his wife had dreamed of for their daughter, a world where love truly was stronger than hate. His faith, which had wavered in the face of cruelty, now stood firm again, reinforced by the overwhelming response of his community. The bright walls, the busy volunteers, the sound of laughter and purpose filling the space, it all spoke to a truth that no amount of hatred could erase. Love, when given the chance, would always build something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. The cafe hummed with life on reopening day, more vibrant than ever before. Sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows, catching the sparkle of the new paint that covered the walls in warm, welcoming colors. Where hate had once marred the space, dozens of painted hearts now decorated the walls, each one carefully added by community members who had come together to help rebuild. James stood near the entrance, greeting people as they filed in. His chest swelled with emotion as he watched the cafe fill beyond capacity. There were familiar faces from church, veterans he'd served with, and many newcomers he'd never seen before. The space buzzed with conversation and laughter, creating a melody that seemed to wash away the bitter memory of the vandalism. Lily darted between tables in her Sunday best, her braids bouncing as she helped pass out plates of cookies she'd baked herself. "Daddy," she called out, waving to him with flour-dusted hands. "Mrs. Johnson says these are even better than her famous chocolate chips." The elderly church ladies had outdone themselves, filling every surface with home-cooked dishes. The aroma of fresh cornbread, fried chicken, and sweet potato pie, mixed with coffee and newly baked pastries, creating an irresistible invitation to gather and share. Near the window, where ugly words had been sprayed just days ago, an impromptu choir of church members began to sing "Amazing Grace." Other voices joined in, the harmony spreading through the room like a warm embrace. James watched as people who might never have spoken to each other outside these walls now stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing in the music. "Mr. Carter," called out Pastor Williams, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. "I believe these good people would like to hear from you." The room quieted, all eyes turning to James. He felt Lily's small hand slip into his as she appeared at his side. Drawing strength from her presence, he cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "A week ago," he began, his voice steady but touched with emotion, "someone tried to tell us that hate was stronger than love. They came in the dark and left their message on our walls." He paused, seeing heads nodding in remembrance. "But look around you now. Look at what love built in response." The crowd murmured in agreement. An elderly white woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while the black veteran next to her placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "My late wife," James continued, giving Lily's hand a gentle squeeze, "always taught our daughter that love is stronger than hate. When those walls were vandalized, I almost forgot that lesson. But Lily," he looked down at his daughter, who beamed up at him, "Lily reminded me of her mother's words." The room grew still, hanging on his every word. Even the babies who had been fussing fell quiet, as if sensing the importance of the moment. "This cafe isn't just about serving food," James said, gesturing to the packed room. "It's about serving hope. It's about choosing love when hate seems easier. It's about remembering that we're all God's children, regardless of what we look like or where we come from." Several voices called out, "Amen," and "That's right." "Some folks asked me why I didn't just shut down that restaurant downstairs when they showed me hate," James continued. "They wondered why I didn't respond to cruelty with cruelty. Well, I'll tell you why. Because that's not what we're about here. That's not what my wife would have wanted me to teach our daughter." Lily stood a little straighter beside him, pride shining in her eyes. "In this place," James said, his voice growing stronger, "we choose forgiveness. We choose community. We choose to believe that sharing a meal together, singing together, laughing together, these simple acts can change hearts, even the hearts of those who tried to tear us down." The choir softly began humming "Lean on Me" in the background, the melody weaving through his words. "Look at these walls." James gestured to the freshly painted surface decorated with hearts. "Every one of you helped cover darkness with light. Every person in this room proved that when we stand together, love wins. It always wins." Mrs. Johnson, the elderly church lady who had taught Sunday school for 40 years, stood up from her chair. "And we'll keep standing with you, James Carter," she declared firmly, her voice wavering but determined. "This is what community looks like." Other voices joined in agreement, creating a wave of support that filled the room. The choir's humming grew stronger, and people began to sway gently to the rhythm. "So today," James said, wrapping his arm around Lily's shoulders, "we're not just celebrating a reopening, we're celebrating the power of love over hate. We're celebrating each other. We're celebrating hope." The room erupted in applause, the sound rolling through the cafe like thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some wiped tears from their eyes, while others embraced their neighbors. The choir burst into full song, and voices throughout the room joined in, filling the space with joyful noise. James held Lily close as the applause continued to wash over them. She looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with happiness and pride. In that moment, he could almost feel his wife's presence, could almost hear her voice joining in the celebration of love's victory over hate. The cafe buzzed with the gentle hum of conversation and clinking coffee cups on a peaceful Wednesday afternoon. James wiped down the counter while Lily sat at her usual spot, doing homework and occasionally helping serve cookies to customers. The warm aroma of fresh-baked pastries filled the air, mixing with the rich scent of brewing coffee. The bell above the door chimed, and James looked up with his customary welcoming smile. His expression froze. Standing in the doorway was Richard Morton, the former restaurant manager, looking nothing like his previously polished self. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The cafe fell silent. Forks stopped mid-bite. Conversations died mid-sentence. The only sound was the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Lily noticed the change in atmosphere and looked up from her math homework. Her eyes widened as she recognized the man, and she instinctively moved closer to her father. Richard took a few hesitant steps forward, his shoes scuffing against the hardwood floor. His hands trembled as he gripped the strap of his worn briefcase. The proud, sneering man who had once looked down his nose at James was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. "Mr. Carter," Richard's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Mr. Carter, I wonder if I might have a word with you." James placed a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. Several regular customers, including Mr. Thompson, a retired veteran who had helped with the rebuilding, stood up, ready to intervene if needed. "It's okay," James said quietly to the concerned patrons, though his own heart hammered in his chest. He turned to his daughter. "Lily, honey, why don't you go help Mrs. Davis organize the cookie display?" Lily hesitated, looking between her father and Richard with worried eyes. "Are you sure, Daddy?" James squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'm sure, baby. Go on now." As Lily reluctantly moved away, James gestured to a quiet corner table. Richard followed him, his shoulders hunched, looking nothing like the man who had once wielded his authority like a weapon. They sat down, the small table between them feeling like a vast divide. Richard's hands fidgeted with a paper napkin, tearing it into tiny pieces. "I lost my job," Richard finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just at the restaurant. No one in town will hire me. My wife," his voice caught. "She left last week, took our kids to her mother's house, said she couldn't be married to someone filled with so much hate." James remained silent, watching the man struggle with his words. The cafe's usual warmth seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "I've had a lot of time to think," Richard continued, his words coming faster now. "About what I did. About who I am. About." He glanced around the cafe, taking in the diverse faces, the loving messages painted on the walls, the sense of community that filled every corner. "About what you built here, after what I did to you and your daughter." Tears welled in Richard's eyes, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand. "I was raised to think certain ways, to believe certain things. But sitting alone in my empty house these past weeks, I realized those beliefs cost me everything. My job, my family, my self-respect." Richard's shoulders shook as he fought to maintain composure. "I saw how you handled it all, with dignity, with grace. You could have destroyed me immediately. You owned the building. You had every right. But you gave me a chance, and I just got worse." James felt the weight of every eye in the cafe on them. He could hear Lily trying to stay busy with the cookies, but he knew she was listening too. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Richard's voice broke completely. "I know that, but I needed to tell you. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for what I did to you and your little girl." That night, the look in her eyes when He covered his face with his hands, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. James sat very still, feeling the familiar struggle between justice and mercy in his heart. He thought of his late wife, of her constant reminders that love was stronger than hate. He thought of Lily's tears that night, and of her strength in helping him rebuild after the vandalism. Richard lowered his hands, his face streaked with tears. "I understand if you want me to leave. I needed you to know. What I did was wrong. Everything I believed was wrong. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The silence in the cafe was absolute now. Even the jazz had ended, leaving only the soft hum of the coffee machines. James could feel the weight of this moment, how his response would affect not just Richard but everyone watching, everyone who had supported the cafe's message of love and unity. He took a long, deep breath, feeling the magnitude of the choice before him. This was more than just about forgiveness. It was about everything the cafe stood for, everything he had taught Lily about love being stronger than hate. It was about whether he truly believed in second chances, in the power of transformation, in the possibility of redemption. Richard sat there, broken and waiting, while James wrestled with the hardest decision he'd faced since that first night at the restaurant. The cafe fell silent, as Richard Morton stood before James, tears streaming down his weathered face. The man's usually pristine appearance had given way to wrinkled clothes and unkempt hair. Dark circles under his eyes told of sleepless nights. "I've lost everything," Richard's voice cracked. "My job, my reputation, but worst of all, I lost my self-respect. What I did to you and your daughter that night." He glanced at Lily, who watched intently from behind the counter. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. The shame follows me everywhere." James stood perfectly still, his hands resting on the counter. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. Regular customers watched the scene unfold, their coffee cups forgotten in their hands. "My own children won't speak to me," Richard continued, his shoulders slumping. "They saw the video someone posted. My daughter called me a racist. My son." He wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. "My son said he was ashamed to have my last name." The silence in the cafe grew heavier. An elderly woman in the corner clutched her chest, tears welling in her eyes. The young man by the window set down his phone, forgetting to take pictures of the dramatic scene. James took a deep breath, remembering his late wife's words about forgiveness being a choice made daily. He thought about all the nights he'd spent wrestling with anger, all the prayers for strength to choose love over hatred. "Mr. Morton," James's voice was gentle but firm, "what you did that night hurt my daughter deeply. It hurt me too. But holding on to that pain won't heal either of us." Richard nodded, unable to meet James's eyes. "I understand if you hate me. I deserve it." "Hate is what got us here in the first place," James replied, moving around the counter to stand before Richard. "And I refuse to let it win." Lily watched her father intently, her homework forgotten on the counter. Her eyes held the same mixture of wisdom and innocence that had always reminded James of her mother. "I believe in second chances, Mr. Morton, not just in words, but in actions." James gestured to the busy cafe around them. "That's what this place is about. It's about showing the world that love is stronger than hate, that grace is more powerful than judgment." Richard looked up, confusion mixing with hope in his tear-stained face. "I'm offering you a job," James said clearly, causing several patrons to gasp. "Right here, in this cafe." Richard's legs seemed to give out, and he grabbed the nearest chair for support. "A job? After what I did?" "Yes," James nodded. "Because if this place truly stands for what we say it does, then it has to start with us. With me." An elderly woman in the corner began to clap softly, tears running down her cheeks. Others joined in, the sound growing until it filled the cafe with warmth and approval. "I don't deserve this," Richard whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "None of us deserve grace," James replied. "That's what makes it grace." Lily slipped out from behind the counter and approached the two men. Her small hand found her father's, squeezing it gently. "You did the right thing," she whispered, looking up at James with pride shining in her eyes. Richard fell to his knees, sobbing openly now. The proud manager who had once looked down on them was gone, replaced by a broken man experiencing the transformative power of forgiveness. James helped Richard to his feet, leading him to a quiet table in the corner. "We'll start you on Monday," he said softly. "The morning shift. You'll need to learn how to make our special blend of coffee." Richard nodded, unable to speak through his tears. Around them, the cafe's atmosphere had transformed into something almost sacred, witnesses to a moment of genuine redemption. Mrs. Thompson, a regular customer in her 70s, approached their table with a fresh cup of coffee for Richard. "Here, dear," she said, patting his shoulder. "This is what healing looks like." Lily remained by her father's side, her small hand still firmly in his. The afternoon sun caught the tears on her cheeks, making them sparkle like tiny diamonds. "Daddy," she whispered again, "you did the right thing." James squeezed his daughter's hand, knowing that in this moment they had truly honored her mother's memory. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation again, but something had changed. The air felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. Richard sat at the table, holding his coffee cup with trembling hands, his face reflecting both shame and hope, the complex mixture of emotions that comes with true repentance and unexpected grace. The scene around them was a living testament to the power of forgiveness. The sun-drenched cafe, filled with witnesses to this transformation, the gentle murmur of conversations resuming, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries, and at the center of it all, a father and daughter standing together, their joined hands a symbol of the strength it takes to choose love over hate. Lily leaned against her father's side, whispering once more, "You did the right thing." Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty, the kind of pure wisdom that sometimes only children possess. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the cafe's freshly cleaned windows. James Carter stood at the entrance, watching as Richard Morton, the former restaurant manager, carefully arranged flowers in mason jars on each table. The man's movements were different now. Gone was the arrogant stride, replaced by a humble purposefulness that spoke of hard-learned lessons. "Those look beautiful, Mr. Morton," Lily said, skipping past with a stack of paper plates in her arms. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one her mother had bought her before passing away. Richard's face softened. "Thank you, Lily. And please, remember to call me Richard." He adjusted a sunflower, his hands trembling slightly. "I want everything to be perfect for tonight." James watched the interaction, his heart warming at how far they'd all come. The Unity Night event had been Lily's idea, a chance to bring everyone together, share stories, and celebrate their community's strength. The cafe's walls, once marred by hateful graffiti, now displayed colorful artwork from local children and photographs of smiling faces from all walks of life. The kitchen buzzed with activity as church ladies worked their magic, filling the air with the aroma of home-cooked dishes. Mrs. Thompson, her gray hair tucked neatly under a hairnet, supervised the preparation of her famous peach cobbler. "James Carter," she called out, "come taste this and tell me if it needs more cinnamon." James obliged, accepting a warm spoonful. "Perfect as always, Mrs. Thompson." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Thank you for everything." By 6 o'clock, people began streaming in. Veterans in pressed uniforms sat beside young families. Teachers chatted with construction workers. Children darted between tables, their laughter a melody sweeter than any background music could provide. Richard worked steadily, serving drinks and clearing tables with quiet efficiency. Occasionally, someone who recognized him from the incident would stiffen, but his genuine smile and gentle demeanor usually won them over. James had noticed how the man made a point to serve everyone with equal respect and care. "Daddy," Lily tugged at James's sleeve. "Can I ring the bell now?" James checked his watch and nodded. Lily rushed to the counter where a brass bell sat waiting. Its clear ring brought conversations to a pause as people turned their attention to the front of the room. James stepped forward, his daughter's hand firmly in his. "Welcome, everyone, to our first Unity Night." His voice carried clearly through the packed cafe. A few months ago, this space was empty. Then it became a dream, then a target of hate. But look at it now. Look at all of you. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. James continued, "Tonight isn't just about sharing food. It's about sharing our stories, our lives, our hearts, because that's what community means." The evening flowed like a gentle river. People took turns at the microphone, sharing tales that made the audience laugh and cry. Mrs. Thompson spoke about growing up in the segregated South and her joy at seeing how far they'd come. A young college student described feeling welcomed in the cafe when everywhere else seemed cold and lonely. Richard's turn at the microphone hushed the room. He stood straight, though his voice wavered. "I was raised with certain beliefs," he began. "Beliefs I never questioned until they cost me everything. Standing here now, serving in this cafe, I've learned more about humanity in these past weeks than in all my years before." He looked directly at James. "Thank you for showing me what true strength looks like." The music started up again. Gospel songs, folk tunes, and even some modern hits. Children danced while their parents clapped along. The cafe hummed with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with hearts beating in harmony. As the evening wore on, James noticed Lily growing tired. She'd spent hours helping serve desserts, showing younger kids where the bathroom was, and making sure everyone felt welcome, just like her mother would have done. Now she sat beside him at a corner table, her head heavy against his arm. The crowd had thinned, leaving behind a peaceful contentment. A few older couples swayed to a slow song while Richard and the volunteers started the cleanup. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, but they couldn't dim the light that seemed to glow from within the cafe itself. James looked around at what they'd built, not just a business, but a sanctuary of acceptance and love. The walls that had once been defaced now held hope. The tables where uncomfortable silences once sat now rang with genuine laughter. Even the floor beneath their feet seemed to hold the echo of countless steps moving forward together. Lily snuggled closer to her father, her eyes heavy with sleep but her smile still bright. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice carrying all the innocent wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Mommy would be proud." James felt tears well up in his eyes as he held his daughter close. She was right. His wife would have loved this. She would have seen past the hate to the possibility of something beautiful, just as Lily had. A tear slipped down his cheek as he smiled, knowing that in this moment, in this place, love had truly proven stronger than hate. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of James Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.